Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. And the Ukrainian state is falling apart. The state apparatus, now commanded by the Kiev fascist clique, is losing control of their own military forces. As we've found over the past several weeks, nobody wants to go into harm's way for the sake of Turchinov, Yatsenyuk, Yarosh, and Tyanibok. And the latest proof we have is the occupation now since Sunday. Pro-Russian forces, starting on April 6th, pro-Russian forces have seized control of government buildings, first in Kharkov, then in the nearby cities of Donetsk and in Lugansk. And there's some action going on in Nikolaev, I think it's called. The Kharkov group has been ejected, but the Donetsk one is fortified, I think, more substantially. At a certain point, somebody there in Kiev, some member of the Kiev fascist clique, be it Turchinov or Yatsenyuk, gave the order to attack, and that was specifically the Alpha group of the Ukrainian special forces that were told to attack the people in Lugansk and Donetsk. This is now in the last 24 hours, and we're speaking to you on the afternoon of Friday, the 11th of April. The order was to the Alpha group of special forces, attack the occupied buildings, and now the Alpha group has mutinied. The Alpha group is no longer reliable. Ukraine's elite Alpha group reportedly refused to obey an order to besiege the protester-held buildings, and at the apparently some kind of a meeting held in Donetsk, one of the commanders of the Alpha group said that his unit is designed to rescue hostages and fight terrorism and will not act in violation of the law. And that's after the seizure of the building in Kharkov. Remember, in Kharkov, about 50 to 60 of the occupiers, pro-Russians, demanding a referendum, or at the very least, total local autonomy. On Thursday, a police lieutenant colonel gave a press conference saying that he and other local officers had been deceived by the Kiev authorities. The Kiev fascist clique told these police officers that they were going to go into the building in Kharkov and take it back from dangerous armed bandits. But in effect, no, it was a political demonstration in favor of a referendum leading towards autonomy at the least, independence more likely. And this guy, Chuikov, not Marshal Chuikov, but Andrei Chuikov, said that he will no longer obey criminal orders from the Kiev fascist clique. He resigns from office, saying that he would be fired anyway after talking to the newspapers. So this week, it's been Donetsk, Kharkov, Lugansk, some action also in Odessa, and in, as I said, Nikolaev. Now, perhaps as a result of this, we're hearing conciliatory noises from the lying fascist mouth of Yatsenyuk, the IMF butcher, right? The guy who does it all with green eye. He commits genocide with green eye shades and calculators. So the Kiev fascist clique is in big trouble. And what Yatsenyuk is saying is, oh, we're open to all kinds of autonomy, and federalism and so forth. Unfortunately, it's a bit late for this now, and it's also impossible to believe it when it comes from a group of desperados, adventurers, fascists, anti-Semites, racists, and God knows what else. The scum of the earth. Hey, Ukraine, couldn't you do better than this gang of scum? Well, there it is. So we're not lifting a finger for these characters. Let's make it clear. The American people are anti-fascist, were anti-fascist, never allied with fascism unfortunately, until after 1945, the government did. But the population was always anti-fascist in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, never made a treaty with fascism, never recommended appeasing fascism. So the demands from these Ukrainian fascist adventurers, I urge, should fall on deaf ears. Now, we also have NATO publishing their pictures, right? The NATO characters have been making a big brouhaha in the last several days that allegedly Russia is once again massing troops on the land border of the Russian Federation to Ukraine. And today, they tried to imitate Adlai Stevenson that I talked about in previous weeks. Remember, Adlai Stevenson came into that session of the UN Security Council in October 1962 and said, look, here are the missile launchers in Cuba. Well, this time it's satellite imagery made available by NATO to the world press in the past 24 hours, and it turns out that they faked it. It's another big lie, another stunt by NATO, but they're also getting caught. Oh, my heavens. How embarrassing. The pictures that NATO shows are from 2013. They're more than 4 months old, in other words. So they refer to a situation which is not the current one, and their demand is deeply rooted in the current situation. Now, we'll talk about Ukraine constantly during the broadcast today. One of the lessons of all this is don't take any cookies from Victoria Nuland. This harpy appeared this week for congressional testimony. I think you'd want to get some kind of a report from the World Health Organization on Nuland before taking anything from her. Not Twinkies, not cookies or biscuits, as some news channels are saying. You want to stay away from Nuland, otherwise what she has may be infectious. So the question then arises about the gas, the Ukrainian gas. Well, the fact is, Ukraine, the Ukrainian SSR, Soviet Socialist Republic, was a part of the USSR. It was built up through the various Soviet 5-year plans, starting in the late 1920s. The heavy industry concentration in the Donetsk Donbass, which is one of the great coal and steel centers of the world, and still could be, and is needed, God knows. Look at Africa, look at those factories, put them together, you get something much better. The integration was total. So here we have a case of a total economic integration, which is then rent by political secessionism. And again, the political secessionism that produced Ukraine this last time around. I'm not talking 1918. I'm not talking 1941. The political secessionism was run top-down by the nomenclatura. The guy's name was Leonid Kravchuk, and he was an oligarch. And the poor Ukrainian people had very little say. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the much-touted Ukrainian version of Spetsnaz, the Alpha Group, refuses to attack in Donetsk and Lugansk, refuses the orders coming from the Kiev fascist clique. The process of disaffection gets greater and greater. They've issued calls for the mobilization of reserves, the call-up of reserves. Those have been widely ignored. The Navy refused to fight for them. The Army forces in Crimea refused to fight for them. Nobody wants to fight for them, except we have some neocons who think that Americans should fight and die for the Kiev fascist clique. And we have to differ on that one, don't we? And we've had enough of these neocons. Man, they are one-trick ponies, and they have an amazing impudence to come back after what they did to the United States, with their hands dripping with the blood of Afghanistan and Iraq especially. And now they come forward, and now they want more action. And the shop-worn slogans used by McCain. But there's a worse level, and we'll get to it in just a minute. But the gas, what does the gas show? Well, it shows that the economic viability of Ukraine was never there. In previous weeks, we've outlined that Ukraine has a very tenuous hold on political existence. The political legitimacy, if we can call it that, of Ukraine is minimal. It is a 1918 creation of the German General Staff. And I showed this through the quotes I had from Der Spiegel. You can look at this on Tarpley.net, the metaphysical doubts on the existence of the Ukrainian state, of modern Ukraine. It's a very dubious proposition politically, historically. But then, when we get to the economic basis of this viability, the situation, if anything, is even worse. And what Putin pointed out this week is that Ukraine has been the recipient of de facto gas subsidies, and even at that rate, they don't pay. So the idea is there was a political price, as I pointed out some years back. The Ukrainian position is to say we want a political price on gas, but we want to be as abrasive, hostile, and Russophobic and threatening with NATO as possible. So we demand the right to threaten you even as you subsidize us. It's a little bit like Japan in 1941 vis-a-vis the United States. But that's another story. We'll get to that in time for the Pearl Harbor anniversary. But the action, therefore, by Putin is simply to say, look, you must pay for the gas. You're going to have to pay for it now at the world market rate. You made your decision, right? You buttered your bread. Now sleep in it. So if you're looking for the world market, you admire the market. Hey, Yatsenyuk, you're a free market man. And we had the poisonous gnome, Giftsberg. The Giftsberg Anders Astlund is still all over the place, spewing venom. His Russophobia, he's about to explode. His head is going to explode. And that's the guy who was telling Yeltsin what to do economically, this great friend of the Russian people, Anders Astlund, the great theoretician of IMF shock therapy back in 1991, 92, 93. These characters love the market. Well, they say two things. We want the free market. So now Ukraine is being offered world market prices, not subsidized prices, and they're expected to pay at the new level. And then, of course, on the inside, we've got the working out of the IMF program of genocidal austerity. We're just having the IMF spring meeting here in Washington. We've got Madame Lagarde, or Lagarde, I guess it is, Lagarde, pardon my French, but Madame Lagarde is holding press conferences and so forth. A lot of tergiversation going on there. But the idea is that the IMF wants killer austerity, and the way that's going to work is a gradual increase, we're told. It's going to be a 4-year tourniquet, and it's going to be an increase of 40% in the gas price inside the country in the first year. 40% in the first year, 40% in the second year, and then it gets easy. Then it's 20% in the third year and 20% in the fourth year. And that adds up to 120%. But notice, this is compound interest, right? This is a more than 120% cut at the end of the day, right? Compounding works going up the magic of compounding on the way down looks pretty bad. So that's going to be the gas story. So Putin essentially says, pay the world market price and pay. And since you're a deadbeat, pay up front. And I think he's also bringing home to the feckless Europeans, the Euro losers, what can we call them, who have allowed themselves to be dragged into this insanity. Merkel, what a pathetic performance. The entire economy depends on good relations with Russia, and this dumb lady, right, this absolutely impossible frump, allows Germany to be drawn in, sucked in to this destabilization of Ukraine. Nothing but losses, right? She is just hopeless, incompetent, as I hope some of these smokestack barons in the Ruhr have figured out, right? The Schlotbarone, they have to figure out that Merkel is simply impossible. I mean, she's pulled back now, but look at the costs that have already been generated. Now, in the case of Merkel, she's responding to pressure. Helmut Schmidt, I had this out on Twitter last week already, but let's stress it again here. Helmut Schmidt gave an interview, Helmut Schmidt being, of course, the former chancellor of Germany in the 70s and 80s, key guy. He's the closest thing to an elder statesman that we have in Germany. He's actually one of the few elder statesmen we have anywhere in the world, and from time to time there is some wisdom to be found here. And Helmut Schmidt said, what Putin did was perfectly understandable, and that essentially the Western policy makes no sense. So there's somebody who's been through the mill and can tell you something about the way the world actually works. Now, Merkel, after that, very quickly began with no more sanctions, enough with the sanctions, and so forth. So I think Merkel has been bopped on the bean by some of the smokestack barons and the bankers and so forth, and told to cool it, right? Back off, Merkel, or you'll be back in East Germany before you know it. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Keep up with everything at tarpley.net, tarpley.net, including major article only available, worldwide exclusive, tarpley.net. Metaphysical doubts on the existence of Ukraine, a 1918 creation of the German General Staff. What is Ukraine worth? Well, 1 million tons of grain, 400 million eggs, 50,000 pounds of beef, hemp, manganese, and so forth at that time, right? And so this is the economic basis. And I'm told now by a very important historian that I hope to get on the program, if not this week, then next week, that Fritz Fischer, the German historian who is known for his book on Germany's grab for world power. This I disagree with, but he's got another book called the German War Aims in World War I. And, of course, he gives ample space to the German war aim being the creation of Ukraine. It was the detaching of Ukraine from the Russian Empire, and then using it as this cornucopia of grain and food. There's also the case that this area that is being fought over now, Donetsk, in 1918, when this bread peace, the food peace of February 1918 was being signed between the brand new Kiev Rada puppet state and the German General Staff, Berlin, the Germans looked and they said, I see the Ukraine border does not include Donetsk. Why don't we give you Donetsk, and then we Germans will be able to loot the coal as well as other products, because we'll make Donetsk a part of Ukraine. And that's what it goes back to. How about that? So at least one of these cities, the one that's in the focus of attention right now, was added to Ukraine by planners from the German General Staff. So what we're seeing with this gas question and with this economic question in general is that Ukraine is, by and large, not viable as an economic entity separate from Russia after, 80 years, 70 years at least, of joint, totally integrated development based on the Russian-Soviet 5-year plans, the Petreaus. All of that was integrating the Ukrainian economy into the larger Russian-Soviet economy. And then along comes Kravchuk, and he says, well, for me and my oligarchs to stay in power, we're going to play the Ukrainian nationalist card. And lo and behold, as Putin says, people woke up on the morning of January 1st, or whatever it was, between 91 and 92, in a new country that they hadn't heard anything about, because it was not prepared. There was not a mass movement. There was not a big idea of having, some mass liberation front demanding this stuff. So it's not viable. And on the German side, the business leaders are perfectly aware, at least they are. Maybe Merkel has she has a kind of a vague, shimmering understanding of this, that the German-Russian economic integration is also now very, very close and simply does not allow economic warfare to be brought in. So we had a German business leader this week saying, look, we are absolutely not thinking about getting fracking gas from the Marcellus Shale of Pennsylvania and getting it across the Atlantic Ocean. No, we're glad to be close to the Russian gas fields because that's a factor of safety for us. Unfortunately, you've got these Ukrainian lunatics in between, right? And that's why the U.S. has built them up. $5 billion, as Nuland said, over the last decade or two, to build up this fascist movement in Ukraine. And this morning on NPR, right, National Pentagon Radio, the Diane Rehm Show weekly review, all of these yammering scribblers were pretty much in agreement. Germany is the single biggest obstacle. Oh, we wish those Germans would be more aggressive. Now, this gets us to a simple calculation. The U.S. is pursuing what here? They're using the Kiev fascist clique as a group of provocateurs for various reasons, and it cuts against Russia, of course, but it also cuts against Europe. If you could con the Europeans using these Eastern European fanatic puppet states, right, the places where anti-Russianism is the be-all and end-all of every political debate, right, the Russophobic bloc on the eastern edge of NATO, if you could use them to con the other NATO powers, it's just a little bit like the Iraq War 11 years ago, you could, in this case, then get severe damage on the relations between Russia and the EU. But when you say EU, who's going to get hurt? Germany gets hurt the most. Italy gets hurt the second most. And then France, much, much less. The British, they think not at all, although, watch out, the commodity flows are not that great, but the financial flows are perhaps even bigger. It's essentially a U.S. con job designed to damage Europe. Remember, the whole U.S. policy since the days of Christine Romer is export the depression to Europe, wreck the euro to save the dollar and to some extent the pound. But export depression to Europe, the greater the chaos in Europe, that's maybe the only way to make the U.S. look good in comparison. Now, this theme, since I've mentioned it, it reminds us of this old debate, which I think it acquires a certain relevance here, and we're not looking for dogmatic solutions, but simply noting that this was all debated, right? We've gone through, I think, what Marx had to say about this. Marx and Engels thought that that the large historical countries and they included Ireland and Poland after a little bit of back and forth. And above all, they wanted Germany, I guess, to be united. But they were contemptuous of places like the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Slovenes, the Serbs, Croatians, and others. And I think this is because British intelligence, which is what they were working for, British intelligence was backing Kossuth in Hungary. And the idea was to build up a greater Hungary. And in order to do that, you had to keep these South and Southeastern Slavic peoples in servitude to the Magyar landowners. So I think if you want to see why Marx and Engels don't really have a coherent policy on nationalities, it's because of this. It's because their British masters, people like David Urquhart and others, and the British Foreign Office and British Admiralty, were communicating through subtle but effective ways to Marx and Engels at the British Museum or whatever it was, that don't do anything that will rock the boat for the Hungarians. Kossuth, big British gambit at that point, and you can see that by his quasi-support of the Confederate States of America in that same interval. But then, later on, we get this debate between Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg. And Lenin says, well, we Bolsheviks have to at least affirm in principle that any nationality can have national self-determination. And Rosa Luxemburg, much more intelligent person, comes along and says, from the point of view of Poland, no, we don't want an independent Poland. That's going to be even more reactionary than Poland in the arms of the Russian Empire. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So anyway, the point of this is the whole question about some of these countries, can they be independent or not? Now, we have an independent Poland, which has held on since 1945, although, as people from Samobrona would argue, first as a Soviet protectorate, now as a U.S. protectorate. They actually said the Soviet protectorate is better. But the question then of Ukraine would be this. Luxemburg wrote in her doctoral thesis, The Industrial Development of Poland, she said essentially, look, Poland is simply the most heavily industrialized part of the Russian empire, and we're going to have a much better chance with the larger framework than we would, say, here in Poland alone. And in any case, the economic integration is so thorough that an independent Poland would have tremendous problems. Now, part of this has to do with what she was thinking of as the likely confines of Poland, right? The Poland that emerged in the 1920s may be somewhat bigger than what she thought, and therefore somewhat more viable. But I think what we've got today is an example of this. In other words, what Luxemburg says in her thesis, The Industrial Development of Poland, I think it does apply to Ukraine today, that it is simply economically not feasible to have this as a separate country unless you're in a very close customs union, say, with Moscow and, of course, with Minsk, Smolensk, with Belarus. So that is the problem that emerges. And Helmut Schmidt is right. What Russia did was completely understandable. And we even have Steven Seagal, the American actor, who says pretty much the same thing. Now, in terms of how do you respond to this? Fracking is a dead end. Fracking, according to some things that I've been looking at, doesn't last that long. You essentially you bet your chips, place your bet on fracking. You're going to be okay for a few years, but at the end of that, you're going to be stuck with an exhausted, low-technology, backward-looking, obsolete energy economy. That is not the answer. Whether you like it or not, the answer is nuclear today, thermonuclear tomorrow. And if you want to, obviously put the emphasis on the ITER that is now being built in the south of France, the thermonuclear fusion power. All right. Now, let us look for a second at what's going on with Syria, because here we have some extremely interesting things. The neocon and other fascists. Remember, we have neocons, and then we have the humanitarian interventionists, right, who operate under left cover. So we have right-wing reactionary cover, and then we have the humanitarian intervention responsibility to protect crew, who are warmongers but under left cover. And they, of course, are prominent in the Obama administration. Here we are with the Wall Street Journal, Tuesday, April 8th, and it headline, Kerry and military clash on Syria. What we see here is that there is a warmonger cabal operating inside the Obama administration. Obama is not the head of it. As a matter of fact, Obama is the object or the target of it for dummies who can't understand political analysis or who simply blinded by hate or blinded by their loyalty to the CIA, and we'll see what the relevance is. And it's also proven. We got proof in today's Washington Post. That is to say, today, Friday, the 11th of April. Here's how it goes. Wall Street Journal, Adam Entous, E-N-T-O-U-S, and Julian E. Barnes. Washington, and again, April 8th. Frustrated by the stalemate in Syria, Secretary of State John Kerry has been pushing for the U.S. military to be more aggressive in supporting the country's rebel forces. Opposition has come from the institution that would spearhead any such effort, the Pentagon. Mr. Kerry and United Nations Ambassador Samantha Power, or loopiness, have advocated options that range from an American military intervention to weaken the regime of President Bashar al-Assad to using U.S. Special Operations Forces to train and equip a large number of rebel fighters. Such moves would go far beyond the U.S. current engagement. In recent White House meetings, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel have pushed back against military intervention, said senior officials. The Dempsey and Hagel say there is a risk of being dragged into an open-ended foreign entanglement. Of course, the Pentagon argues that if you attack Assad, you can hardly expect him to keep his end of the chemical deal. Kerry has agreed to delay at the present time. Not clear where Obama stands. But the top national security advisors to Obama currently propose the training of death squads, terrorist rebels, as the consensus recommendations. And, of course, Obama, we already had last week that Obama got an earful when he went to Saudi Arabia. And out of that, the most important thing was they were going to transfer 5 man-pads, 5 shoulder-held missiles with some kind of security safeguards, which I don't think would be effective, and give those to the terrorists. And again, once the first Israeli airliner comes down, Obama, that's the end of you. So get that straight. So here's the cabal. Kerry and Power have told current and former officials that the only way to turn the momentum of the war and restart diplomacy would be to put some sort of military intervention on the table. Diplomacy, says Kerry, has to be backed by the threat of force, and it would strengthen the hand of the administration, according to a senior Obama administration official. So Dempsey has been Kerry's opponent, and from Dempsey's perspective, it goes like this. If it weren't for Dempsey, you would be right back in Iraq or Afghanistan, said a senior defense official. And remember, if that were Romney surrounded by neocons, you could kiss a lot goodbye. And that would be, we'd already have war with Syria, war with Iran, and war with Russia with some madman like Mad Dog Romney. So instead we have Obama. Now, Kerry has brought in reinforcements. This is the really shocking part. Kerry has been huddling with retired generals David Petraeus, CIA, Pentagon madman, golpista, Bonapartist, David Petraeus, and Jack Keane. Jack Keane is this conduit to the American Enterprise Institute, and of course to Field Marshal Kagan, Frederick Kagan, and his charming wife, that is to say, Kim Kagan, who's the head of the Institute for the Study of War. Right? Hoover was peace, at least sometimes, but in the case of Kim Kagan, it's only a war. So think of it as Petraeus, Keane, the CIA. Remember, Petraeus is now backed by Kravis of Kohlberg, Kravis Roberts, friends of the Bush gang, going back to the Permian Basin. Read all about it in my Bush book. But the American Enterprise Institute and their neocons, Field Marshal Frederick Kagan and Kim Kagan, right, who are also totally connected to Petraeus. Petraeus and McChrystal brought them over to Afghanistan, essentially inserted them as civilians illegally into the military command. So Petraeus and Keane are telling Kerry they believe a military program to train and equip the Syrian rebels and limited strikes, war, airstrikes, war, don't kid yourself, would weaken Mr. Assad, and that could be effective. So there is a warmonger cabal at work, and there it is in the Wall Street Journal. And there's more. Back in a minute. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio, our second hour. It's the 11th of April, Friday afternoon, and we're looking at the very stark evidence of an actual subversive warmonger clique, warmonger cabal, a faction fight inside the Obama administration. And we're looking at this interesting article Tuesday, April 8th, in the Wall Street Journal by Adam Entous, E-N-T-O-U-S, Kerry and the military clashing on Syria. It's Kerry and Samantha Power, joined by CIA General David Petraeus, the adulterer, but he doesn't care. He just keeps coming back. And also Jack Keane, American Enterprise Institute colleague of the Kagans, Frederick Kagan and Kim Kagan, who were also integrated by Petraeus illegally into the U.S. command structure in Afghanistan. So these people, of course, bunglers. Look at imagine a military where the Kagans and Samantha Power, the loopy theoretician, we'll have some more about her in a minute, are the leaders. So those are the lineup, and the warmonger program starts with a military program to train and equip the Syrian rebels, i.e. terrorists, and limited strikes to weaken Assad. This week I discovered for the first time something called One America Network, and the evening I found it, they were telling you about how the Free Syrian Army, supported by the U.S., by Obama, the way they see it, fine, is killing Christians in Syria. How about that? Maybe that's an issue for the midterm elections, right, to turn out a certain kind of base. Well, Obama, if you don't want that, you better shut it down. So, according to the Wall Street Journal, in Situation Room meetings in recent months, Mr. Kerry and Ms. Power, Sam Power, that is to say Mrs. Cass Sunstein, have argued for a military intervention to change Assad's calculations and try to push him back to peace talks, which have broken down. The revised arming and training proposal is the special favorite of Samantha Power. U.S. Special Operations Forces would take the lead under the CIA's authority, so the whole thing could be kept secret. But the Pentagon doesn't like it, and Hagel wonders, how you going to vet them rebels? Well, you can't, can you? They're going to bamboozle you. All right. So that, if we put that together with the Washington Post stuff about the 5 man pads going to the terrorists, that's worrisome. And Obama, you better back off, Obama, because, again, the first Israeli airliner or airliner from some other Western-backed or Western country, your name is going to be mud, and the Democratic Party is going to be finish. If people are in Congress, you better be demanding money be cut off for this. Now, let's look at the 2 protagonists of the Warmonger coalition for a minute, the ones that are up front. Kerry. Hey, for Kerry, it's 50 years of skull and bones, knowing the infamous calendar of God-forsaken Yale University, as we do, having observed this for so long. Tap Day. Tap Day is around now. It may be a secret, I'm not sure, but check the Yale calendar for Tap Day. Today they come up behind you, tap you on the shoulder and say, skull and bones, do you accept? And if you do, you got to go to your room, and then they come and start the harrowing ordeal. So 50 years ago, around now, middle to late April, 1964, this is when Mad Dog Kerry was inducted into his secret society, Skull and Bones. And when he became Secretary of State about a year ago now, I wrote something, you can see it on Tarpley.net, which refers to this question. Most people didn't seem to be that interested in the fact that Kerry was from Skull and Bones. So he is. So it's 50 years since he successfully completed his campaign to get tapped for Skull and Bones, and of course he accepted. Now, for Samantha Power, her rise has been meteoric. Here we have the Washington Post magazine, Sunday, April 6th, this past Sunday. From critic to insider, can the UN ambassador Samantha Power stop the killing? Why no? That's not the idea at all. The goal is to escalate the killing. What's the matter with you? Washington Post, of course, it's Bezos now. I guess we can chalk up something to that. Manuel Roig Francia writes all this stuff. We see, for example, that Samantha Power rose to fame, as we know. In 2003, she got the Pulitzer Prize for A Problem from Hell, America and the Age of Genocide. This is mainly about Bosnia and Rwanda and a couple of other things. She is one of the principal architects of the responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention. The point is, though, that she now finds that her, even from the imperialist point of view, she complains, I didn't have any idea how complicated these things become once you're in government. This whole thing is as far from a no-brainer as I've ever seen. Well, her crude, simplistic, arid banality seems to be serving her poorly. Why not fire her based on that quote? Now, everybody knew in the Audis that Samantha Power was a military interventionist, as the Washington Post puts it so delicately. She was a warmonger. And she says, it used to drive me crazy. You'd spend 7 years of your life pulling together what you think is a very nuanced look at a complicated subject, and it gets reduced to a bumper sticker that you don't identify with. Well, of course, she criticized Mad Dog Bush for his crude and unilateral bombing because it was not nuanced. What Samantha offers is nuanced bombing. Make sure all the victims know when they get blown to atoms and smithereens that it was nuanced bombing that did them in. And we have even a foreign policy writer named David Reef, pundit. He says the approach of Samantha Power is faux multilateralism, the American empire with a smiley face. Okay, fine. Now, she's a protege of Richard Holbrooke, the Wall Street predator who became big guy in the State Department. She has married Cass Sunstein in Ireland in 2008, and Holbrooke allowed her to get back into the Obama campaign because, remember, during the primaries, Samantha Power had said Hillary Clinton is a monster, and then she joined the Victoria Nuland Club, or what can we call it, the F-bomb club. In that same interview, you can find it. Look up F-bomb Samantha Power, and you'll see that that's what she was saying about the primaries and about the monster Hillary Clinton. So Nuland and Power, two prominent warmongers, share this vile, vulgar, uncultured, crude, decadent vocabulary of late imperialism. It's interesting. You look at these movies like Argo or something like this, right? And you see that all the officials are foul-mouthed in the extreme, and I suppose that's naturalistic realism. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the genocide chick Samantha Power, her loopiness, made the cover of the Washington Post magazine, and we have to ask ourselves, what is Cass Sunstein doing to this poor woman? What's going on? Is this abuse? Take a look at that mug, and you'll ask yourself, is that ravaged look a matter of cosmetics, or does it reflect some activities? My heavens, is he tying her up? God knows. So it turns out that Samantha Power wears a bracelet which says fearlessness, and she twiddles this bracelet. So she thinks she's fearless as a representative of imperialism. Well, maybe this is a little bit like Abby Martin saying that she's acting on her conscience, and it just happens to be the State Department, Soros, U.S. imperialist, British imperialist, EU, NATO, OECD line. Boy, that takes a lot of pure courage. Fearlessness. I'm thinking about the Central European fascist slogan, Tod schreckt uns nicht. We're not afraid of death, or we're fearless. If you're not afraid of death, then you're not afraid of anything. Fearlessness. So this is, as usual, these eerie echoes of the Central European fascism of the 20s and 30s coming forward in these creatures of late imperialism. Now, her team were even shown this on a recent flight. Samantha Power was flying with Linda Thomas Greenfield, civil rights lawyer David Pressman, and Edgard Kagan, K-A-G-A-N. My heavens, we've got to look him up. We can't seem to find whether he's part of the Robert Kagan, Donald Kagan, the Frederick Kagan, this distinguished family, and of course the Pater Familias is a professor of classics at Yale, yet another Kagan. So we've got Edgard Kagan, Edgar with a D, Kagan, like Edgar Varese, but Edgard Kagan, and she's got her tame journalist Michelle Kellerman of National Public Radio. So this is a little bit, it's maybe not Mein Kampf, but it's Mein Kampfchen, as told by Samantha Power. And she is a militarist, and that seems to bother her, the genocide chick. She says the worst thing in her family was to be boring. Well, you're boring because you are a one-trick pony. All right, but now, having characterized these figures, let's look at what I think actually shows us the verification of the Wall Street Journal story. And this is now getting very close to the heart of the matter. Yesterday's Washington Post, Thursday, April 10th. We have an article by David H. Petreaus, by the golpista himself, right, the coup artist, the architect of Benghazi, the guy who was trying to put Romney into the White House, right? That's what it was. The October surprise in September courtesy of General Petraeus. He was out seeing Argo that night. How interesting. But he was the guy who had the command authority over the CIA assets in Tripoli and at the CIA annex, who were told not to intervene. And we've never seen Petraeus grilled in front of any of those Republican committees. As far as I know, he was never grilled. He should be grilled. Remember, we wanted grilled Petraeus and grilled Ham. Those are the two people that controlled the military assets that were relevant to Benghazi. But now, the article tells us a bunch of, well, it says that David H. Petraeus and his friend Vance Serchuk is an adjunct fellow at the Center for a New American Security. Petraeus, of course, former director of the CIA, former commander of the U.S. Central Command, and the leading focus of Bonapartism, that is to say military takeover in the United States at this time. It's called The Day After an Iran Deal. And essentially the main part of this article is why there should not be a deal with Iran. Amazing stuff. Excuse me. And the pollen now, we have the cherry blossoms going here, and the pollen in general is quite acute. So look, Petraeus and his sidekick Serchuk, the day after an Iran deal, why this is bad. Essentially the thesis is there should not be a deal with Iran. And the problem, he says, is, why? If you make a deal with Iran, then you're going to have to lift the majority of your sanctions, and Iran will resume normal trade with the world's major economies, and that will take away our leverage. And remember, he says, Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism. Well, the competition is intense, isn't it? A lot of it coming from the U.S. and the British and the French. Don't forget them. So they don't like Iran. But here's the idea. The outcome of a deal with Iran would be, it's more plausible that removing sanctions would strengthen Tehran's ability to project malign influence, evil influence, in its near abroad, including Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula and the Palestinian territories. And that would make Iran a better resourced and more dangerous adversary. So this is not good, says Petraeus. What you've got to do is find ways to perpetuate conflict, or as they put it, to lay the groundwork for mitigating the evil, bad, the spin-offs of a peace. So the first thing is really, he has double talk. I won't read all his double talk. It's regime change. If you're going to do that, you better have regime change. And then you've got to continue sanctions because otherwise you're going to have Tehran doing all these terrible things, allegedly with terrorism and so forth. But now, the third point, this is the main point. The United States, says Petraeus and his friend Serchuk, say they, the United States needs to look hard at its position on Syria, arguably now the central front in a broader struggle for primacy in the Middle East. Recent reports that the Obama administration has been considering various forms of increased support to the Syrian opposition, including providing a limited number of strategically significant weapon systems, are encouraging. Now listen to this absolute fakery. These reports, if true, you know they're true, Petreaus. You're part of the clique. You're part of the cabal with Terry and Samantha and others. These reports, if true, would reflect a recognition that you need something more. And we'll get to the exact something more in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Samantha Power, according to the Washington Post magazine, played a key role in persuading Obama to intervene militarily in Libya by imposing a no-fly zone and conducting missile strikes. Murder, mayhem. Samantha Power's stock in trade. She had the ear of the president, and people knew that, says Michael Posner, former Assistant Secretary of State. Barkey, take back your ear. Don't do it. So this warmonger harpy, Samantha Power, is pushing for the attack on Syria now. Look how well it turned out in Libya. Everything's hunky-dory in Libya. Human rights guaranteed. So now we have Petreaus in Thursday, April 10th, Washington Post, with fausse naivete, writing that it looks like Obama is considering forms of increased support to the death squads in Syria, including a limited number of strategically significant weapon systems. That's the 5 man pads we had from the Washington Post. These reports, if true, would reflect a recognition that a much more robust, focused, and well-resourced effort is required to reverse the Assad's regime's current battlefield momentum. And then he's got some other stuff after that. So he basically says no peace with Iran and attack Syria in the meantime. So there it is. And I say that what we have in the Washington Post on April 10th abundantly confirms the front page story of the Wall Street Journal from the previous Tuesday, that there is this warmonger clique. Now, if you have any political brains at all, what do you do at this point? Do you attack Obama? Well, if you do, you're an idiot. Attack Kerry. Attack Samantha Power. Attack Petraeus. Absolutely. Attack Jack Keane and that clique at the American Enterprise Institute. Because we have, in the course of this story, let's see if we can find the quotes, what you've got to do is attack the people who are pushing most for the war that you don't want. Because if you attack Obama, ironically, you are simply making it easier for these other people to operate. You're not exposing them. Let's just say this Obama story. Obama pushes back at some point in this debate, and he essentially he tries to say that what these people are now demanding from him is not what he wants. And of course, remember, if you're going to have the Democratic base turn out, the Democratic base does not want war. And it's going to be harder and harder for Nobel Prize winner Barack Obama to come out and show some kind of finding in November if he starts a war now. Right? So Obama, all kinds of reasons not to do it. But when you see any website that focuses on demonizing Obama rather than providing analysis of what's actually happening before your eyes, that is reprehensible. It's reprehensible to the point of, yeah, stupidity, I get it, but then who's on the CIA payroll? Who's getting money from Petraeus? If you're not attacking Petraeus on an issue like this, then why? Are you really that stupid, or are you also corrupt? So there are some quotes floating around about Obama pushing back against these people. He's not happy with it. So you get the idea. Okay, so that I think is extremely important, right? Focus the opprobrium on the people who are actually doing it. Now, in terms of the economic situation, there are rumblings. There are these constant reports of a slowdown in China. I don't know what to make of all that. But principally, we have the Greeks coming back to the bond market. Somehow, that Greece is borrowing more and can borrow more is a sign of success? Oh, I'm sorry, that can't be a success. We have Merkel today in Athens And of course, this is now the viceroy, I guess, of the IMF, Merkel, meeting Samaras, the local satrap, and celebrating the fact that Greece has now gone back to the bond markets and has been able to sell some bonds at interest rates, which I'm sure were drugged to make them look good, some limited amount. And an interesting byproduct of this, the kiss of death comes to Samaras from Merkel. Merkel being the most hated person, and I think anybody would have to have contempt for this bungling, dumb woman. But fine, she's the kiss of death for Samaras. And what we've discovered is Tsipras, Alexis Tsipras, our favorite candidate for Prime Minister of Greece, our favorite candidate for President of the European Commission, and our favorite candidate in general with his lists in the European Parliament elections, which are now, about 6 to 7 weeks away, around the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th of May, depending on the country you're in. So we're told now, I think it's Schäuble, says there's going to be another bailout for Greece. They're going to have another round of loans and another round of austerity. Well, as Tsipras points out, what's the story? He got an interview on France 24, and he even got mentioned by RT, who up to now, I don't think RT has ever recognized the existence of Tsipras, at least in recent months. Maybe I haven't seen it all. But on France 24, it says, look, the debt burden of Greece under the 4 years of austerity, the debt burden of Greece has gone from 125% of GDP to 175% of GDP. So that's gotten rather worse. The unemployment rate is now about 28%, and the gross domestic product has gone down by 1/3. So what do we need? And Tsipras says two things. We need debt relief, the cancellation of a large part of this unbearable financial debt, which for a country like Greece, that's the only way to go. They need a debt moratorium. Why don't you say debt moratorium, and it's going to be clearer to everybody. And if it's not going to be done multilaterally, it will be done unilaterally. And a New Deal. And he says New Deal, once again, in the original clear text, that is in English, in American. New Deal. So that on the whole looks interesting. Now, Tsipras continues to campaign. Tsipras was in Palermo, Sicily. That's the most recent stop that I have been able to follow. But he is also prominent in Athens these days as the leading challenger to Samaras and therefore to Merkel. And he's continued his idea that Merkel is the sleepwalker of Europe, La Sonnambula. We just had Bellini's opera at the Metropolitan Opera in the past couple of weeks. That's Merkel, La Sonnambula. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's our final segment already. We got to cover some items. Let me just pause for a second and extend condolences to the family of Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier, Reverend Joe Frazier, was one of the original members of the Chad Mitchell trio in the early 1960s, I think from about 1960 to 1966. And politically speaking, this was generally the best of the folk music the groups of that time. Joe Frazier is the loss to his family and to all of us. He is part of that classic 1962 recording on the John Birch Society, the mockery of those reactionaries that was possible then. And I think the loss of somebody like Joe Frazier reminds us that this niche, this function in society has really not been filled. We need political satire of that caliber and also that artistic and musical level. So, again, condolences and sympathy to the family of Joe Frazier. And if you haven't followed this, take a look at my Twitter feed and you'll have the link to a recording, the 1962 recording of the John Birch Society song. And think about how relevant this is. Paul Ryan, with his killer budget, just passed yesterday by the reactionaries and fascists of the Republican House, passed the genocidal Ryan budget. In other words, the Republican Party, once again, on record, demanding genocide against the American people, killing Americans through economic means, violation of the Nuremberg Code, Class A war crime, Nuremberg offense. And we still have people telling us that the John Birch Society is worthy of support. John Birch Society, of course, a spin-off of the Mormon operation in Utah through Ezra Taft Benson and other reactionaries, and then the Skousen family playing a big role in their ideology. So we're still stuck with this. And, of course, there's always a racist undertone. As we see with Ryan, he can't get away from his reliance on people like Charles Murray, the bell curve, absolute racists. It is now approximately 50 years since Lyndon B. Johnson signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is a milestone in terms of public accommodations. But I'm wondering, little Rand Paul, does he support the 1964 Civil Rights Act? I think he does not. And Ron Paul, for sure, does not support the 1964 Civil Rights Act. You remember their position is property rights trump all other rights. If you own a bus, a hotel, a railroad, a ferry, you can turn people away if you don't like the color of their skin. Property rights trump all other rights. And that is exactly what the U.S. Constitution opposes, because we're talking about the general welfare. We're also talking about the Anglo-Saxon common law. If it's a common carrier, if it's open to anybody who arrives and who can pay, then you cannot discriminate. And that goes back to the pre-American phase. It goes back to the Anglo-Saxon common law. So that's the level of these characters. Before we leave LBJ, let's just underline that lesson for Obama. Obama, look at LBJ, look at that tremendous achievement, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all of that legislation. And for many people, not in the black community so much, but for people who remember the Vietnam War, his name is Mud, still is Mud. Now, we have a more nuanced view here. But Obama, if you don't want to get that kind of hatred against you, stay out of Ukraine, hands off Syria, get your ear back from loopy Samantha Power and the Skull and Bones crew around Kerry. Now, we've got a lot of flap around the Koch brothers. They deserve every bit of it. These people, in their own way, have emerged as one of the main foci of fascist ideology and fascist action in our time. And I'm still laughing. One of the Koch brothers wrote to the Wall Street Journal last week complaining about character assassination against him and how unfair it is. And he's verklempt. But, of course, they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on attack ads, meaning character assassination. So you live by slander, you're going to perish by slander, too, and vilification and all the rest. Now, speaking of some of these interesting things, Lois Lerner is now public enemy number one. I think she's getting more negative attention than anybody since Ethel Rosenberg. But please, Republicans, Lois Lerner is public enemy number one. I would say Koch, Petraeus, Kerry. These are possible public enemies number one. Newland, have a vote around them. Lois Lerner, this is simply a joke. And remember, the whole issue there is targeting means you didn't get your tax exemption on time. So fascist billionaires didn't get their tax exemption, so they could carry out character assassination without paying taxes, and it didn't come fast enough. So that's the great brouhaha around that, right? That's the outrage of Lois Lerner. So, sorry, we're not going to get upset about that. On the Republican front, more and more talk about Jeb Bush. Beware, Jeb Bush. As I pointed out at the time, the scandals against Christie are, of course, most welcome. They remove one monster from the scene, but at the same time, we have to be aware, and we were aware, that interests loyal to Jeb Bush were key in exploding this Christie scandal, the George Washington Bridgegate. You just have to look back, and you can do this best by looking at George H.W. Bush, the unauthorized biography, available through my website, tarpley.net. What you'll see there is how Bush the elder disposed of Gary Hart with scandals, including the infamous Don Aronow. The Blue Thunder book is relevant. Jeb Bush coming forward there, and it's very similar to the way Gary Hart was pushed out of the way by scandals. So the other couple of issues still left. We have to thank Seymour Hersh for a public service. His article now, once again, rejected by the New Yorker, only available in the London Review of Books. Go to my Twitter feed. You'll have a link to this article. It's the Red Line and the Rat Line. And the Rat Line, of course, was the Nazi escape route to Latin America in the 1945 to 50 period, right? All the SS characters got down to Latin America through the Rat Line. But this time the Rat Line is organized by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others, and it brings terrorists into Syria. And what Seymour Hersh argues in this article goes beyond the article that he had in December. December article said Obama had no proof that Assad used chemical weapons, and indeed all the proof was stacked against this hypothesis. It all indicated that Assad had not unleashed the chemical weapons. Now, clear that it was done in order to provoke the U.S. into war, and that it was done with the help of Turkey, Erdogan. And that's actually where we have those. This article has the quotations from Obama of essentially expressing his hostility to the warmongers around him. So take a look at that article by Seymour Hersh, and you'll see Obama pushing back. So once again, the idea that Obama is the main center of criminal energy and aggressive force is simply not true. Therefore, focus on Kerry, Samantha Power, Nuland, and above all, Petreaus. And we'll be back next week.